Hello and welcome to another Developer Essentials. So this time around we're going to be taking a look at animations, and we're going to be taking a look at this from a fairly low level point of view in terms of just animating objects and things like that in our environment. And another point in time then we might take a look at doing animations where we're working with bringing in characters and things like of that and bringing in animations for them. But a bunch of stuff we'll be looking at today will actually get things set up and be things that you could then use when we're working with those animation setups for characters. So to begin with, what I want to do is I want to just create a simple little setup where we've got our ground here, and I also then want to, with this, I want to just create some walls and a door. Because what I'm going to be doing, well, we're going to be doing actually, is we're going to be making, make that thinner. That's pretty good. And let's bring that up. So we're going to actually be making some doors today. Let's make that pretty good. That probably needs to be larger. So let's go for 4. That's good. So that's a wall. This will be our other wall. Put these 2 parts to the wall, and let's set up some materials so we can easily see everything as well. So we're going to create a door, and a door that is able to slide. So a door that has 2 parts to it, and that those parts slide to the side and then can also slide back in closed. So let's get our materials set up. We want a ground material. We want a material for the walls. So material. And then we want a material that will be for our door. So our ground, we're just going to make the ground, that works. And the walls, let's color them as well. That also works. And then we want to have our door in here. So this is going to be door. And this will be the door on the left-hand side. So let's bring this back into the center. Let's update our height scale. Change the width of that. Bring this up a little bit. So that's pretty good. Let's maybe shrink the height of this the tiniest amount. So let's maybe make this 1.8. That's pretty good. And then that should be able to be minus 0.5 for when it's closed. Can give it the material. So this will be door right. And this will be at 0.5. That's good. Then I'm going to create a parent object for this door. And that parent object will contain both of these segments. The idea being that if we wanted to then chuck a door anywhere, we could prefab this up and then easily apply that wherever we need. And then I'm going to create one final thing that will be, I think, 0.2 in height, be at 0. I think 1.90 looks about right. 0.2 in height, 0.25 in width, 0.2, and then this is just going to be, I believe, it's referred to as the lintel, I think is what it's called. And I'm going to put that in as part of the door as well. So there we go. We've got our door there. Let's set the color of these. Let's go for that works. And there we go. We've got our door. So we're going to be able to, idea is we want to be able to walk up to that door, open it, and then have it close. So we've got a few different states there for it. So this is something where what we can do is we could manage all of this in code. So I could write code for controlling all of the logic there for the opening, the closing, for being able to move those different elements of it. I could absolutely do that in code. But if I do this as an animation, then I can control the rate of movement. And this is a big thing. It's a visual element. So using tools like the animation pipeline for controlling it allows us to control it better because we're working with a visual element. It makes more sense for it to be controlled using sort of visual techniques there. So what I can do is, and I'm going to add this on the door object, so the parent object here, I'm going to add an animator. So not an animation, but an animator. These are different. An animator allows us to, we have this thing called an animator controller, which I'm going to create a folder for those. In most cases, what we'll be working with will actually be animators like this. Actually, I'm going to call this a folder for objects. I'm going to create this as if I was setting this up for a larger project. So under the door one, this is where I would then have an animator controller. So anim controller door. And then I link this up here. So an animator controller, if I open this up and I want to have the door selected, so we can see it has this thing, any state, entry, exit. So the animator controller, that actually gives us what's called an animation state machine. So the idea is that our object, the animations for it can be in particular states. So for our door, if we think about it, well, it can be closed, it can be open, can be opening, or it can be closing. So we've got 4 different states there that it could be in. For a character, we could be walking or running or crouching, and lots of different states that we could be in there. So it's a way of being able to, rather than say play this specific animation, we say, well, we want to go to this state, and it allows us to control the circumstances under which we are heading to that state. It's really effective sort of setup. So if we look at just actually creating, I could set up my states here, and so I could create an empty state, and this might be, so I can go through and do all of this logic for creating it. It's actually another way that I can do this, and that it's a little bit easier for working with this. And what I do is under Window and under Animation, I bring up this Animation tab. I'm going to bring this down here, and what I'm going to do is merge the console back over so we've got more of a view for this. So with the door selected, and wouldn't matter whether I want to have the door selected in this case so that it's properly tied to the object, you can see that I can create an animation clip. So I'm going to do this, and the first thing I'm going to create is an animation clip for the door opening. So if I go create, then I can give it a name. So anim door open, or anim open door. And then, so I can manually add in a property. So I'm going to do this for the first one. I'm going to add that in. And the important thing is we can see up the top here these time markers. And so these can change whether they're in seconds or frames. This one's currently in seconds. So let's say, okay, I want the door to open. And I probably want that to happen, let's go for over 5 seconds. So one of the ways I can do this is I can say, okay, well, add a property. I want to, and I can see the different things that it's able to access. So in this case, for door left, I want to access its transform. We can see lots of different things that we can access here, but I'm going to grab the position, and so I add that in. And then with that position added in, you can see it's added in these markers here. So that's a keyframe. So these animation clips, they are keyframe animation, as in at particular frames, we set up the values there. Because what that lets me do is, okay, well, now at this frame, so I can add in the keyframe here, and then I can change these values, and I can watch and see, okay, well, if I have a slide to 1.25, that's pretty good, maybe to 1.4. 1.5 would be fully out of the way, so maybe 1.45. And then I can test this animation. So if I jump back to the start, so I can play, and I can see, okay, that, and it'll generally loop it here. So it manages to do that transition. That's pretty good. So for auto, I can actually come in and customize how this is behaving. And so I can go to this curve section, and we can see then here, and it's showing how that transitions from our starting value over here to our final value. And similar to with animation curves that we've seen, this editor behaves in the similar manner. We can add in additional points. We can change the slope, things like that for them. And that will then change the behavior of the animation. So in this case, having it actually open back up a little bit, close back up a little bit before then opening again. So we can very easily make changes like that if we need to. So that's in the curve section. We can also, this samples section here. So you'll notice that this is taking place over 5 seconds. If I adjust samples here, so let's adjust this down. So if I change this to 15, and what we'll see is, so it's going much sort of slower there. If I will increase the speed of this, and we'll see this clip's actually got a lot of extra keys here, so we often need to remove those. So with those removed, and so I've changed the samples to 120. You can see the time markers here have changed. That's because this is now ridiculously fast. If I went down to 10, then we can see it's slower. If I go back to 60, then it's returning to its original time. So we can really sort of control the speed that these things happen over. And I can actually move these. So I decided I wanted this to happen over a longer period. That's something that's very easy to do. I can just increase the point in time where that's happening at, like this. And then that will change the speed of it. And in terms of interpreting the time here, so we're at 10 there. Let's drag this over to 1. So these, 5 here is actually not 5 seconds. That's actually 5 frames. So if we want this to happen over the course of 5 seconds, we actually need to zoom out quite a lot. So it's easy to get confused by what the numbers look like, because we see 5 and we think, oh yeah, okay, that's using a normal time notation, that must be 5 seconds, and it's actually not. But what it means is then if we need to change this and bring it down to, say, 2 seconds, we can really easily see just that process for it. And we can then, going back to our curves one, we can have that little bit of a bounce happen. And now over time, it'll be a little bit more obvious. So we can have it open that little bit. So things like that, very, very easy to do with this. So we can control the pattern of the movement just visually, and super easy to test. Because that's the other thing with this, it's really quick and easy for me to just make a change like that. Test, can see like it opens a bit, hesitates, and keeps opening. So very straightforward. So that's one way that we can record that animation. It's not the only way, because we've seen this record button here. So what I can do is I can hit record. You'll notice this goes red and these ones here go red. If I select door right, now we can see it's not currently, and I'm going to switch back to the dope sheet one, it's not currently moving. I can drag in time here to at the end, and then what I could do is my X value here, I could change this. You'll see how it's gone red here. And then now when I move this, when I scrub along in time, I can see that it is updating. And I could pick a point where it's like, okay, well maybe here, I'm going to tweak this so it's actually back a little bit. And it'll just add in new keys. So really simple process for adding in and recording stuff. And I could be changing largely any of the parameters here, and it will add in animations for them. So really effective method for doing it. Then I could tweak them in the curves view if I needed as well. So, okay, that's pretty cool. We've got an animation in there for opening. And if I go back to the animator, we'll see that animation is in there. So we can set up other animations because we've got our different states. So if we go and, well, that was for opening the door. Well, closing the door, maybe we want closing the door to actually be the same, but play in reverse. Well, we can do that. So we can see our anim open door asset. Well, the first thing we want to do is turn off loop time. And then I'm going to call this close door. Now, because I haven't gone and freshly created that animation through the other workflow, I need to manually add in a state here. So I could add in a state. I can link that to close door. And then I can call this close door. And then what this one will do is I will be able to play this in reverse. And there's actually, so for playing in reverse, one of the ways that I can do that is if I play it with a speed of -1, that will typically make it play in reverse. So, okay, what I want to do is I want to have it go from entry to opening the door and then to close door. Now, my animator window, I'm going to bring down here so we can watch this while it runs and I hit play. Because when I hit play, it actually immediately runs the open door anim, and we can see the progress coming through there. So that means I should be able to link up my closed door one, and it should open then close. So let's make a transition to closed door. And then let's watch and see what happens. So we'll start, plays the closed door one, plays open then close. So really straightforward for being able to have it switch between those particular ones. So that worked really easily. So we've got closing of a door. Now, we might want the door to be starting closed though, and only opens on a command, or starting open and then closes. So this is where what we commonly need to do is we often need to set up further states where what we will have is a closed state or closed idle and an open state or an open idle. So these are fairly easy to set up. What I would do for these is again on our animations one, I can come down here and I can say, okay, create a new clip, anim, idle, door idle, closed. And then this one, well, that animation doesn't actually strictly need anything in it because it's not actually doing anything. But what I could do is I could say that, okay, let's put in the properties for our door left. Oops, not the is active, but we can animate things like is active. But our transform position, and then the same thing for our door rights. Transform position. And then we could just be overriding those. Where for left, we know that it's minus 1.45, and it is, actually no, sorry, it's 0.5. So this animation does nothing. And then we could add in another animation for our open one. And that one we would have the different values. So door idle open. So again, to the left, transform position. This is going to be minus 1.45. See, that'll be at that, and we set the final value here to that also. So that's good. And then we do the same thing by adding in door right, transform position, 1.45, 45. So these two ones, we do want them to be looping. So idle animations typically will be looping items. And then in our animator, we can see our different ones. So we want to start in door closed. So we'll make a transition, and this is going to be the default state, which actually means we don't need the transition in there because it's the default one. So we're going to start at closed. I'm going to get rid of these transitions. So we go from closed. So when we're closed, we can go and try to open the door. So we'll transition from closed to open. And then that will go to our idle open. And then we want our transition here for going from idle open to closed. So we go to close the door. So we've got this sequence ones. Now we obviously don't want it to run through that entire sequence. And this is where parameters come in. So we can set up different ones here. And we've got these things for float, int, bool, and trigger. So float, int, and bool behave kind of like what we would expect. They are information that comes through. We could use that for controlling things like the speed. We can use that for controlling a range of different things. But these are information that comes through. Trigger, on the other hand, is for when something has happened, for when we're wanting to say, yep, this thing's changed, and for an action to take place. And then, so that's a really useful thing, because what happens once you have triggered something, you can't re-trigger it again until that trigger has been reset. So if I create a trigger, so I could create one for open door, and I could create another trigger for close door. And then how these work is, okay, so for going from idle closed to open, the condition is open door. And then also from here, from door idle open to close, the condition is closed door. So I can then test these and see how does this look, how does this work. Handy thing is I can have this open while testing, which is also really great. And I'm closed. So I'm going to close that animation tab. And then let's test this. So at the moment, it should run and it should be stay closed, nothing else happens. We can see it's continuing to loop through this. So I tick open door, switches to open, now it's in that item. Now if I want to close the door, tick, and then it plays closed, goes back to the closed item. What if I tick both of these really quickly though? So if I say open, closed, you can see that is staying ticked and it will just immediately close straight away. So really, really handy sort of setup there with the triggers. So that's pretty cool. How do we use that in code though? Because we probably want something where, okay, well, we can get near this for it to open. So let's set up and we can do this with the door. Within the door, we're going to create a 3D object and we're going to make this a cube. Trigger zone. And let's make this a bit wider than that. I want it to be a little bit wider than the door, but not too wide. And definitely not that sort of size. That's pretty good. Probably a little bit wider than that again, I reckon. So that's pretty good. We could set up as a material for that. So material, door trigger, and we'll make that a transparent one. That's pretty good. So we've got a trigger zone there for the door. That'll be set the is trigger flag for that. So the idea is that as something moves into that, we want the door to open. So that means we're going to need some code. Create C# script door. And we're also going to need a thing that can be moving through this. So let's make sure we've got, let's use a sphere. And this sphere is going to be the thing that will trigger that door opening. And we're going to give it a rigid body, but turn off gravity. All right, so this is going to be able to move through here, and that we want it to cause the door to open. So, well, our door script is going to be attached on something with the animator. So this is where having acquire component animator, that would just mean that we're able to properly ensure that we've got that animator present. So serialize field. You know, we don't need a serialize field at all. So we'll have our animator, linked animator. We can just retrieve that. Good. And then we would have our on trigger enter. And this will have a collider other. And then we'll also have on trigger exit. What we want to do then is we would say, okay, linked animator, set trigger, and we check our naming because we want to make sure we've got the naming right. So this was open door. And then this one would be closed door, closed door. So that looks solid. We can attach that script onto our door. And what we're hoping to be able to do is have it that when this sphere moves through, that it just causes that to open. So we've got our sphere selected. I'm going to move my game view down to here. So I'm going to mostly be focusing in the scene view. So we move this over. Well, notice nothing happens. And there's a reason nothing happens, and that's because we've set up our door logic here. It's on the, that parent object is where the script is on, but our collider isn't there. Our collider is on this child object. So that means the child object is the one that is actually going to receive those collision events. So what we can do is, there's a couple of options of how we could go about this. One of the options would be, the actual sphere could have script on it that talks to the door and finds the right script. So that would require it to be doing a bit of looking up, which is not going to be the fastest. So that's not necessarily an ideal option. We could attach a rigid body onto the door. Little bit of overkill, probably not the ideal thing that we need to do. The other thing that we could do is we could say this component here for the collider, we could bring this collider and add this over onto our door itself, and we actually then get rid of this trigger zone. We could bring across things like the mesh filter and the mesh renderer, absolutely, but we can actually just get rid of that. And then the door itself, we can adjust its collider manually here, which what we would be saying is similar to before. We go for 2.5 in width, and we can see the outline of it here. Can go for 3 in Z and 0.5 in Y. So that looks pretty decent. And so now if we come through, then we can see it's in the idle one. We bring this over closer. You can see that it's opening it. That's cool. We exit, closes. Good. Then I enter again, and it does eventually open. We're getting a little bit of physics weirdness. Let me turn on that being kinematic. That'll make it happier. But let's test that again. We move over, opens, re-exit, closes, enter again, opens again. So we're getting pretty decent behavior there. We can move up to the thing and it will open. And then, and if we spam this, then it shouldn't actually matter because it's always going to work fairly sensibly. Now we can potentially, if we go really, really all out and just moving this around, very much confuse it. And we can, as we can see, we managed to get both ones flagged, but it never gets into an unrecoverable state. And this is an important thing with this. It always manages to be able to return to being in a working state. So that's pretty good. That's pretty handy. We can do more than this though with the animations, because this is just some simple stuff with this. We can do a lot more with this. So we could also then be setting up stuff where it was, maybe we want different sound effects to play at particular points, or maybe we want something else to happen at a certain point in the animation. For example, some classic examples there is you might have some object that the player is interacting with, and that they're playing an animation to do that interaction, and you want sound synchronized with when particular things are happening with that. So we can do that. If I bring my animation window back up and I select one of these animations, so if I select the door, then I'll be able to, so I think the door open, actually let's go for door close is a good one to start with. I can set up here events, because we saw we've got the things for adding in a keyframe, but I can actually add in an event. Maybe I want a sound, because we've got this point here where stuff kind of is sticking a little bit. So I might want to emit a sound at this point. So I can add in an event, and I can see we get a little marker here, which it's a little bit hard to actually sort of see. But then we have this thing where it's saying no function selected. Well, if I go over to my door and I set up public void on left door stuck, and maybe let's also set up a public void on door open, so we can see a couple of ones. And all I'm going to have these do is just display a message. And that's all it's going to do. It's just going to display a message. So this one will be the left door stuck one. And select that. Got the open. Let's just make sure that was on the closed door that happened actually. So we can say left door stuck. If we go to our open door one, we want to add in another one on this one, we can do the exact same thing, left door stuck. Then when it's opening, well, we decided we want to have potentially, some sound happen there. So on door open. So let's test it, see what happens. Bring up our console so we can see if we're getting these messages out. So our sphere moves over. Open the door message, we get the left door is stuck one. We move away, we get the same thing again. So very, very easy to, in our animations that we author, hook this up to kicking off particular audio, things like that. And now we have a prefab door here that I can just drag this down here and then, okay, well, I've got one door there. Well, I want another door. And it would just be really easy to then add in extra doors wherever we need. And they have that logic. We could customize, which animations each one potentially plays. So this one opens, so pretty solid. Maybe we want to be able to control the speed of the door. And we did see that the animator, there was this ability to add in things like float. So let's do that. So maybe door speed. I'm going to default that to 1. So, okay. Well, we can see speed and things like that. We've got this multiplier. So we can say, well, it's coming from parameter, and that's door speed. Now, it wouldn't make sense on the idle one, but we can on these opening ones. We can say, yep, key off of door speed, and same for closed. Then I can feed that speed through. So I can set up here, serialize field, float, speed, multiplier, and I'm going to make this a ranged one from 0 to 2. And then what it will do is, now I would not normally do this in update, but we can set float. I believe it was called door speed, speed multiplier. And the only reason I'm doing this in update is so that I can change it while I'm running. Alright, so let's see what this does, because I've got my 2 doors, and let's name these. First door, second door. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that the second door is really rapid to open. First door opens slowly, second door is going to just be really, really rapid. So we'll run this. So our sphere, so first door opens at the normal speed that we expect. Then our second door, much quicker. And I could change that if I wanted to. It's like, yeah, no, maybe that's actually too fast. I want to do the opposite and have it open and close really slowly. Come closer, and again, it's changed the speed. It's changed the behavior of it really easily, and it doesn't affect this first door. So this is the nice thing with the animators, that you could change then properties in that behavior on different doors without needing to change the particular sort of animator setup there. All you need to do is change the parameters you're feeding into it. So animators are really handy for setting up little things like this. We can be animating other things as well. So for example, I might want to animate the light here, and I could be controlling things like its angle, I could be controlling things like its intensity. So easy way for doing that, I select the light. In my animation tab, I can go create. I can set up a name for the animation. So anim light idle. And you'll see that automatically sets up an animator controller and lets me start editing it. So let's look at a few different things I could do with this, because we've seen stuff for position, but we could also animate rotation. So I've turned on recording, and we can see I could be animating this. So let's start it at 0. Let's say at 2 minutes 30, it's rotated to 180. And then at, sorry, not 2 minutes 30, 2 seconds 30. And then at 5 seconds, let's say it is at 360. So largely back to, oops, not that one, 360. Then we can scrub through and see how that looks. So we can see the shadows are rotating around. So that looks pretty good. And that will be one that's fine to loop as well. We can take a look and see, okay, well, maybe can we adjust the intensity as well? And the answer is yes. So we could say the intensity is 1 at that point. It might at this point, maybe it drops down to 0.25 before returning back to 1. So we're trying to author this as something that loops. And again, then we can just scrub through and see the intensity does change there, which is cool. What about color? Can we animate the color changing? So let's take a look. So this is what the color currently is. So again, let's adjust this. And we'll start it at 44. And at this point, let's make the color a bit more on the magenta side, actually a bit more purple. Let's go for a fairly purplish color. And then we can see what it was back here. Grab that color. And come back to the end here and change this. So we can see it's going to smoothly animate doing those direction and color changes. So if we stop recording, and we can just see how quickly that happens. So that's pretty good, but maybe we want this to happen over a slower pacing. So if we changed our samples here to 30, that'll actually make it happen over 10 seconds now. So reducing the samples here will take the existing stuff and then spread it out. So it'll allow you to have it run over a longer period effectively. And because this is a looping one, it will just do this forever. So intensity ramps down. You can see the direction changing. Intensity ramps back up. This is going to continue, and I can be doing this while I'm doing any logic with any of these other doors as well. So really effective setup. You can see with these, even if I move through really quickly, they still end up behaving largely the way we're wanting to. If we do move really rapidly, we can, like in this case, get them stuck, but then they reset properly when we move back through them. So it's not a game-breaking one where it's going to stay stuck like that forever. So, to recap with animations. So there are ways that we can, way that you can think about them is it's not just movement of something. And it's any case where you are wanting something to be changing that you have got controlled in the inspector. So anything that's controlled in the inspector largely can be animated, in particular if they're numerical values. Even if they're on your own script, you can animate those numerical values. Same with booleans or colors, as we saw. And so they allow us to very easily create something that we can get a reusable thing, for example, like in the case of our doors, or maybe a one-off thing like the changing of our light over time. We can animate that. And then we can control how that animation takes place. So we can control things as we saw, with our door. We can control the speed and the movement of the different doors. We can change the individual elements really easily there. In our curves view, we can see how those curves are changing and add in extra points, remove ones, anything like that we might be needing to be doing. And then when we're working with the actual animators, then as we create those clips, they get automatically added in. And then we can control how it switches between these transitions. So we can make them use triggers. So triggers are useful for when you want to say, hey, this thing's happened. So we use triggers for stuff like that, and we can say, well, the condition for this thing activating is this trigger. If we don't, then it will typically just fall through to the next state that it can. And we can control the process of these transitions. So you can see we can set up that blending that happens between them, the time period that happens over. So if we want the transition between an animation to be a really harsh cut, we can do that. If we want it to be a more gradual blend, then we can also be doing that. And it will tend to default to doing a level of blending there already with it. And we can talk to these in code very easily. So we can pass through floating point values or integers or booleans or even vector 2s. We can be setting our triggers really easily. It's a really straightforward way of being able to work with it. In this case, for opening the door and closing the door, our closed door animation does actually open the door as well, but we use a speed of -1 to play it in reverse. So we can easily do little tricks like that, so we're not having to author as much content. In this case, I could directly just be using the anim open door animation if I wanted for it and playing it at that different speed, just so it's able to be reacting to it. So have a think about the kinds of things that you might want to animate in your level. It could be purely visual things like a light, like doors, but it also could be properties and parameters on an object. It could be stuff like, okay, you could even do things like, well, I'm going to animate the difficulty setting. I'm going to animate the volume level. Any of those things, you can set up animations for them and then play them. And remember, the animations can also have events. So if you need something to happen at a particular point in time, then you can create an event there, and then that can call out to your code. And you could be playing audio, you could be activating some other logic, any of those different things there. So dive in, experiment with those, see the kinds of things that you can create there. Thanks, folks. If you're looking for the code for the project, then in the description below, you'll find a link to the GitHub, And on the GitHub, I've got the code for this project and for all of the other projects. They're freely available. And if you have found the video helpful and you'd like to support the channel, then throwing in a like or subscribing is always a huge help. If you're looking for further ways to support, then I do have a Patreon set up, and that's going to help me keep managing to do these videos for a long time to come, which is going to help more people make cool things. And that's awesome, because that's what this is all about, is helping more people make more cool things. And that is all. Thank you.